Hello again, everyone. Welcome to another live edition of Mic'd Up Sports, the show that goes in depth with the people who build our sports community. And for this episode, we are taking a trip back in time because my guest is a former three-sport athlete from Lincoln High School in Wisconsin, the Wisconsin Rapids to be precise, but her playing days ended when she got to college. That being said, that hasn't stopped her from competing in triathlons or cheering for St. Cloud State, where she works as the Director of Undergraduate Recruitment, or the Green Bay Packers, or her other alma mater, the Minnesota Golden Gophers. So sports still very much a part of her life, even though she doesn't compete as frequently as some of my other guests. That being said, we're thankful to have Hannah Mikels on, a old college friend of mine, and I can't wait to take this trip back in time. Hannah, how about you?
Yes, I'm so excited. Hello, old friend. I was just really psyched when you asked me to do this, and I had to giggle a little bit because I certainly was not a standout athlete, but I loved sports. I had a great attitude, and I continue to be a big fan and a big proponent of athletics, and especially women in athletics. So very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
That's okay. You don't have to be a standout athlete to qualify for this podcast. But you did play three sports throughout your high school career: volleyball, basketball, and track and field as a hurdler. And so I'm just wondering, what got you into sports? Was there one sport that you were hooked on first? How did that come to be?
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I just wanted to be involved in as many things as I could. I wanted to try figure skating. I did soccer. I danced my entire life. I attempted gymnastics, which was not a great experiment. I was a terrible tumbler. I landed on my head a few too many times, and I was like, okay, this isn't for me. But when I got to high school and they had the sports offerings that were available, I don't know what inspired me to do the sports I did. Honestly, I think it may have been because the people I knew participated in those sports. So it wasn't anything that was stand out. But when I started volleyball, I just really, really fell in love with that sport. Just with any sport and any team, having that community piece of it. Volleyball was probably my favorite to participate in when I was in high school. And that was probably the sport where I did the best. We never really went that far as a team. We worked really hard, but as an outside hitter my senior year, I did have the highest kill percentage in my conference. So that's something that I hold on to. That was something I was very proud of. Basketball I got involved in because my older brother played, and I loved growing up and going to his games. And I just always felt this excitement and this passion. And I really built that rapport with the sport of basketball. So that's something I really wanted to be in. And then track and field, man, that one is just so much fun because there's so many different types of people that participate in track and field. You have so many different types of events. So there's a lot of different personalities that participate in that sport. And I was just really attracted to that piece of it. And hurdles was really fun for me. I got involved in hurdles because of my dance background. And I thought that, well, I can dance and I can leap. I suppose I could jump over hurdles, not really realizing that it's not really a leap over a hurdle. It's more of an extended step. But stuck with that then my entire high school career, and definitely wasn't good enough to play sports at the Division I level. I went to the University of Minnesota. That's where I met Mike, but did continue to participate in intramurals and take a track class so I could continue to compete in some of those things. But yeah, I just really enjoyed sports growing up as something to be involved in and something to really teach you discipline and hard work and work ethic and those types of things.
I'm curious, were you considering enrolling at a college to continue athletics? Did you get any offers, or were you comfortable with the notion that you were ready to transition once you got to college?
Yeah, I have to laugh because, so folks, just so you know, before we came on here, Mike was talking about how high school statistics from when we were in high school are kind of buried. You can't really find anything out there. And I laughed and I said, thank goodness, because my statistics were nothing great to look back on. So no, athletics was really never part of the plan for me to move forward with. I could have done volleyball possibly at a Division III institution, but it wasn't anything that was going to be a deciding factor for me. More so, I knew that I wanted to go to a college or university that had a rich history of being heavily involved in athletics and having strong athletic programs. And I think the idea of going to a Division X institution was really attractive to me. Plus, my older sister went to the University of Minnesota. She's 7 years older than me. And so growing up, I really started to build a rapport with the University of Minnesota. Her boyfriend and now husband, he worked for the Golden Gopher football team. So I became a fan, much to the dismay of the rest of my family, who are big Badger fans, obviously growing up in Wisconsin. But that's then where I settled on University of Minnesota. And I knew with going there too, I had the opportunity to work for the football team. So athletics did play a part in that regard, not my own participation, but knowing that I was going to be involved in the athletic community.
And you mentioned the lack of stat keeping resources available when we were in high school. We graduated in 2005. Of course, I went to St. Paul.
You're selling us out here. Come on, man.
I'm just trying to provide context here for the younger fans because they're used to Instagram and Snapchat, Twitter, Facebook, all of that. We didn't have any of that when we were in high school. There were no hubs. Like now you have Wisconsin Sportsnet. We have Minnesota girls basketball hub. Well, I should say we have hubs for every sport here in Minnesota, both run by Sports Engine.
Yes.
But we didn't have any of that back then. So it was really hard to figure out or research anything about athletes. In one regard, that was a disadvantage because it was harder to find out who was who. But at the same time, we didn't necessarily grow up with the pressures that modern day athletes face. You didn't have to worry about getting posterized on Overtime or all of the other outlets that post highlights of games. But if I remember, Wisconsin Rapids, not the largest of cities in Wisconsin.
Correct. No, it was not. It's about 18,000, I believe, is the population. The high school was decently large, though, because all of the surrounding communities that didn't have a high school, so some of the smaller rural farming communities that are around that area, all attend Lincoln High School. So I graduated with about nearly 500 students. It was about 475 students that I graduated with from Lincoln High School. But yeah, when we were in high school, we definitely did not have those same pressures. We were none the wiser with social media. We had MySpace. Do you remember MySpace, Mike?
I do remember MySpace. I still have a page, but I have no way of accessing it. I remember that was big for a while before Facebook took over.
Yes, we had MySpace. And so there was always pressure with, you had your top 8 friends on there, so you had to be very careful about who you were picking for your top 8 friends. And you could have a song that played when people visited your page. So I think, how people talk about subtweets, I think that was like the first subtweet, right? You were putting out a song that sent some type of message to people when they came to your page. So that was always really funny. And we had instant messenger, we had AIM, instant messenger, but really those were the only pieces that we experienced. Facebook started when we were seniors in high school. So, but you could only have it if you had a college email address from a select few colleges, and University of Minnesota was one of those. So I do remember as soon as I got admitted to the U of M, I hopped on Facebook my senior year, but it definitely didn't have the volume of users that it does now. And it did not look the same that it looks now either.
I don't mind not having to worry about ranking my top 8 friends.
No.
I've often said, like, I can never pick one best friend because I have several. And I don't do things like that either. Well, I don't like ranking people that way. But
absolutely not. And it was such a silly thing back then, right? But that was the piece that was like our biggest thing when it came to social media, right? We didn't have any of the other pieces. That was really the only piece that we had.
Well, the reason I brought up what was different now and then. I'm just wondering for you, what was it like growing up as a three-sport athlete at Lincoln, and
Mhm.
you didn't have to worry about people finding out if you were the best player or not. Like you said, you weren't the most decorated athlete
Yep.
to come out of Lincoln, but you still played three sports, so
Yep.
that you're still on the yearbooks, the record books, so you will have a piece of history at that high school. But what was it like for you as a player where you would attend classes, then go to practice, but you didn't have to worry about keeping up with your social media profiles or wondering how folks were going to look at you from a certain game? TV coverage, video coverage. We
Mhm.
had no YouTube to stream these games either, like we do now. So it's like
Absolutely.
you could just get out there and play.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and I look back and in that moment, I didn't know anything differently. But that's a really interesting question, Mike, because now looking back at it through that lens, we just got to enjoy the game. We didn't have to face those same pressures. And I can't imagine what that would be like. In high school, everyone has their insecurities. Humans have their insecurities, right? But especially so in high school, you're really trying to figure out who you are and what you believe in and how you feel about things. And to be under a microscope in navigating your high school world and navigating your athletic career with people that you don't know, complete strangers, possibly adults commenting on your on and off court performances. I can't imagine living in that fishbowl. So for me, it was just really, really enjoyable. I was busy, right? I went to school all day and then I had athletic practice. And then typically I was going to my job, which was Culver's. I worked at Culver's, was my first job back in high school. And I also danced year round at a studio. So there was a lot of demand there. And so you felt stressed out, but to have it compounded and conflated with the fishbowl that some of these kids live under these days, I can't imagine. I have a great amount of empathy for that. So for me, it was a really enjoyable experience. It was really lighthearted. We just got to have fun. And that's really what it was about. Obviously, I was very competitive. I still am competitive, but we got to enjoy the game.
First job at Culver's, spoken like a true Wisconsinite.
Absolutely.
Culver's is
Absolutely. I used to hide cheese curds and French fries in my pockets because we had these huge pants that we wore, which are cool again with the pleats, the high-waisted pleated pants. But when I was in high school, those pants were not cool. But they did allow me to sneak cheese curds and French fries during my shift. Sorry, managers, if anybody stumbles upon this.
I don't think they'll hold it against you.
I hope not. That was quite a long time ago.
Well, my first job was a golf caddy, so I couldn't pull that off.
Nope, not the same.
And the golf course I worked at is now closed and is being turned into, I think, a residence. I think some type of living complex. So
Mm,
residential complex. That's the phrase I'm looking for. Man, how things change with time.
yeah.
Uh, who were the people you looked up to in the realm of sports with all of the activities you took part in? You
Oh,
mentioned
wow.
doing gymnastics before you settled on the three sports you did in high school. So growing
Yeah.
up as a big sports fan, cheering for the Gophers, cheering for the Green Bay Packers, you're probably not the only one who has that dichotomy or that contrast.
Yes.
I think of all those Western Wisconsin folks who are big Twins fans, for example, but when it comes to the
Mhm.
NFL, then they switch over to the in-state team, Green Bay. But who are the athletes you looked up to
Yeah.
as a student athlete yourself?
Well, great question. So that's a really, really interesting question because back then there there wasn't, well, there still isn't a ton of coverage for women's athletics, or at least not as much as I would like to see, but that's a whole different conversation. But there is more now than there was then. So for me, I kind of had a limited view on women in the sports that I was participating in. I think growing up, obviously being in Wisconsin, the NFL and the Packers are a huge deal. It is almost religious, right? Every Sunday, your whole family gets together. You make huge amounts of food all of the time, and so growing up as a child, I was obsessed with Reggie White. He was someone I thought was the coolest, the minister of defense. Like, he was just so powerful, but he was also this really gentle man. And I thought he was the coolest. So I had my Reggie White jersey and I would wear it every Sunday. I would beg my mom to stay up and watch Monday night games. I was in love with Reggie White. When I became an adult, I bought a throwback Reggie White jersey as well. So I still have that. I still wear it for some of my Packer Sundays. So Reggie White was a huge influence for me just as an athlete in general. But then as far as female athletes go, the ones I looked up to weren't necessarily in the sports that I participated in. But I really loved Christy Yamaguchi from figure skating, Dominique Mucciano, Carrie Strug. Who can forget that iconic moment with Carrie Strug? So in the sports that I really enjoyed watching, figure skating, gymnastics, but again, we didn't have the same exposure to women in sports that we do now. And that's something that, you're starting to see that turn. And Mike, you're a part of that, and you've really kind of gotten into females in athletics, which I think is super cool. And so I hope that tide continues to turn.
It's gotten to a point, as I was talking with Hannah before we started this broadcast, I'm now a celebrity, especially in women's basketball. I would not have expected that. That's not something I put down on my to-do list, so to speak, but I'll take it.
Yeah.
It could be worse. I would rather be a celebrity for that than some other events that took place this week, if you know what I'm talking about.
You know what? And we've got to change our perspective on that, right, Mike? Instead of saying like it could be worse, be like, this is phenomenal. This is awesome. You're a celebrity in not women's high school, because in high school, girls' high school basketball. That's awesome.
Young women, they're just young.
Mix of girls and women. Yes.
In legalese, I know what you're saying, but it's like, no, they are going to be young future leaders in our society. That's how I see it.
Language is really important. Whenever I'm speaking, whenever people are talking about like college sports team, and if anybody says girls, I always make sure to correct them, because language is very, very powerful. So I'm glad that you use young women. I think that's important.
Well, I know what you were trying to say, and it's like, no, you're accurate.
Yeah. Yep.
Agreed. Women is women is. It's not like you were calling them, I don't know, Daleks or something, or that's a Doctor Who reference if you don't know what I'm talking about. Some androgynous species.
Oh, yes. No. I just want to make sure that I'm being appropriate, because oftentimes we don't call adult males boys, but we often call adult females girls. And so I just think it's really important that we use that term women. But no, thank you for being a part of that that environment and being part of that culture and building that culture. I think that's really
cool. I think we should end with that. No, I'm kidding. I still have a few more topics that I want to explore, but going back to what you said, of course, I grew up in the Twin Cities area, so our allegiance was the Vikings, even though they have offered nothing but heartbreak, 0-4 in their Super Bowl. They haven't been to one in over 40 years, and we've had a lot. But when I became a sports writer and broadcaster, you learn real quick, you don't control any of that. So years ago, I think it was, about 5 years ago, when Blair Walsh missed that chip shot in the playoff game at TCF Bank, I'm like, well, I guess our season's over.
Yeah.
But
I was going to say, I understand the heartbreak of Minnesota sports, because I call myself a Minnescotty, right? So, and I have my allegiance to the Gophers. So I do understand some of the Minnesota heartbreak.
There you are. We were losing your audio signal for a bit, but I was going to say, even though I grew up in Minnesota, and so my allegiances went to the Minnesota teams, as a football fan, NFL fan, Green Bay, they're in the same division. And so it wasn't it's not uncommon for the networks to air Packers games as long as they don't overlap with Vikings games. So I would see Brett Favre and Reggie White growing up, and I would say you've had a pretty good run with the Packers because you've only had to cheer for two quarterbacks most of your life. Every other team, and sports is a business, so every other team rotates positions. But you had Brett Favre all those years, then Aaron Rodgers,
Mhm.
and yeah, it was hard not to root for Brett Favre in his older years, even though he couldn't figure out if he was retiring or not. And then he went to Minnesota. Who will never forget that whole experience. But
That was
yeah,
rough, Mike, because I was in college when he was on the Vikings, and so that was just really hard because I was over here in Minnesota when it happened, and it just it felt like such a betrayal in the moment. Now, of course, I have to laugh at myself for how dramatic I was, but that was rough. That was rough. But
and
I'm
that
glad y'all got to experience him for a short while.
yes, good, bad, indifference, as one of my friends put it, with that Viking Saints game and the interception. I believe at the end of the fourth quarter, my Packers buddies were saying, we were used to that. That's what made him unpredictable. You would cheer
Yes,
him on. He was the gunslinger. Didn't
yes.
matter how much coverage there was. He was always going to try to make something happen, and that would lead to some great moments, and probably a few that would lead you to pull your hair out.
It was so dichotomous, right? When it was great, and when it was bad, oh boy.
And the Packers, they've had their shares of heartbreaks too. So, like that NFC title game, his last play as a Packer, an interception in the NFC Championship, and even the Minnesota sports guys, they would listen to Wisconsin radio and said it felt like a funeral. It hit them hard, and I think it's one thing as a sports fan. Take the most recent NFC title game where the Vikings got blown out 38-7 against the Eagles following the Stephon Diggs touchdown reception the prior week. At least with that, yeah, it stinks, but like, okay, well, you kind of know where this is going, so you just gotta put that aside. But in games like that, and as a Packers fan, you've had your share of success, and then you've also had your shares of heartbreak too. So you've had a couple of Super Bowls to celebrate, but
Yep.
there was that NFC title game with the Giants, and then years later, I think they were up against the Seattle Seahawks, and then Seattle makes that crazy comeback,
Yep.
and you're going, did that just happen?
Oh yeah. We've definitely had some heartache, that's for certain. And we had some rough stretches in the 90s. I was quite young then, but I do recall my mother. Um, my mom is a hilarious sports fan. She's very passionate about the Packers, as is my whole family. So I grew up experiencing that passion.
But you made some interesting choices. Reggie White, now that's a natural one, the Minister of Defense all those years. But Yamaguchi, Kerry Strug, I knew who they were, but I didn't really follow those Olympic sports.
Yeah.
Gymnastics, for example, or figure skating, they have a term for that for your fans because that's usually when those sports air. And, it is what it is. I think it'd be nice to have a little more for those non-revenue sports, as we call it.
Yes.
But like you were saying, not a lot of examples of women competing, at least in the sports that I grew up watching. And
Mhm.
so we were talking beforehand about one of my favorite shows, American Gladiators. I might have something in the works related to that. I will confirm once I can lock in details, but that was one of the first examples where you could watch men and women competing in the same events, and they weren't treated any differently as a result. They were all seen as contenders trying to show off their stuff against the gladiators and then move on, beat their fellow contender in the eliminator. And it produced some amazing contenders and athletes out of it. So you're right. We didn't have a lot. The WNBA didn't exist when we were growing up, not until 97 when they had the first season.
Right.
And the concepts that I've taken up now, women playing football, for example, I've covered some semi-pro tackle leagues. That was all a pipe dream.
Mhm. Mhm.
So, like I said, some interesting choices, but I had to remind myself we didn't have a WNBA yet. We
Oh,
didn't have a Sarah Fuller, for example, the first.
Right.
Power Five
And I
college
mean,
football female athlete to
yes.
participate in a game.
And that just gave me goosebumps. And you don't expect as an adult the emotion that you feel when you read or see something like that. And it was just so powerful having her do something like that, because we've never seen that. Nobody that looked like me has done something like that before. And so to see that and to think about it, just really, it makes me emotional to think about all the little girls who are going to see that and realize that they can do something like that. Representation is so important. And if you don't see something, you don't necessarily know that you can do it. And so it's hard to create a culture of women in athletics when we're not building it and seeing that as young folks. So like I said, I'm really excited to see it starting to grow even more, right? It's been growing steadily, and I think it's heading in a really great direction. But Christy Yamaguchi, fun fact, Mike, she's married to Brett Hedekin, who was a St. Cloud State hockey player.
Of course you would know that.
Yes.
I should point out, not only is she an employee of St. Cloud State, but Hannah also got her master's degree at St. Cloud State. So she's got the D1, D2 fields covered.
Yes.
And that Minnesota-Wisconsin connection, like you said, the Minnescoti, I have to imagine how your family handles it, because you have these Minnesota ties and they're all diehard Badgers, Packers, Brewers fans. You've got a soft spot for the North Star State.
Yes, so I'm a Minnescani, and I'm also a Gopher Husky hybrid. So I explain that this way. So the Minnescani, the Wisconsin person in me, is a fan of the Packers and the Brewers. I like the Brewers too. And then the Minnesotan, because I went to the U of M Twin Cities, I have an allegiance to all of the U of M sports except hockey. Sorry, Gophers hockey. I'm a fan of the Husky hockey team, because at St. Cloud State, everything is D2 except for men's and women's hockey. Those are both D1. So for men's and women's hockey, I am a Husky hockey fan. But all the other sports I can like at St. Cloud State and the U of M Twin Cities. I can be fans of both because they're different divisions. That's how I explain that. And I'm fortunate because I found a partner, my boyfriend, Sam, who is the head cross country and track and field coach at St. Cloud State. He's also from Wisconsin. He also went to the U of M Twin Cities. He was a college athlete. He ran track and field for the Gophers, and also now works at St. Cloud State. So we have identical sports allegiances, which to me is really important in a relationship, because I really am passionate about cheering on my teams. And so it's more fun when you can share in the same passions.
That does make the household cheering section a little easier, doesn't it?
It does. It does. And I think I know myself, if I'm with someone who's not cheering on the same team, I would get upset.
And going back to what I said, I don't get riled up like that anymore. Of course, I'll watch the rivalry games, Vikings, Packers. I always tune in for that, but it's like I get to enjoy the ride. That's how I see it now as a fan. I don't have to worry about who wins or loses. I just go along for the ride. And of course, with my background in writing and TV, I sometimes study the broadcasts a little differently than most, but I'll get to that maybe in another podcast.
And I joke, I don't get upset if I lose. I'm a very fair sports fan. I cheer for my teams, but I don't cheer against other teams. And I don't, let it sit with me too much. It's fun. It's entertaining. Obviously, there is some passion behind it, but I'm not going to let it ruin my day.
You're not going to break any televisions like the Saints did a few years back.
Oh, no, absolutely
and the Vikings
not.
beat them.
I'm pretty level when it comes to my emotional reactions to sports.
You would just drown your sorrows in cheese, right?
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
You probably have. Being from Wisconsin.
Oh yeah, you open our cheese drawer and there's going to be at least 5 different types of cheese in there at any given time.
Where was I going? Oh yeah, so going back to your time in sports, even if you weren't the star athlete, what were what did you enjoy most about getting to participate in high school women's athletics? What the hell? I'm just going to stick with women for this discussion. But you got to take part in women's athletics and be a part of this movement that maybe you
Yeah.
didn't even realize it. I don't think you were thinking about the representation like you do now, but what were some things you enjoyed about your time as an athlete?
hmm I mean, the family feel, right? The friendships. And I think if you ask a lot of high school athletes, I think the friendships is going to be near or the top of the list for so many folks. I loved getting to know different circles of people that I may not have in some of my classes or in some of my other activities. And I love developing those friendships and that trust and that camaraderie, and just a purpose bigger than yourself, right? I love that about the team sports. And even with track and field, even though the events you were doing were individual, it was still all about the team. And that's really what drove me. Like I said, I wasn't always going to be the the best, but the story that my track coach told about me at our senior banquet was, she even got up there and laughed. Hannah's not going to win all the medals, but she just enjoys being part of the team and wants to help people. There was a hurdle race, I guess. And I didn't remember this when she told the story. There was a hurdle race and one of my competitors fell. And I guess I was the only person that went back and checked on her. But to me, that's what sports was about. It was about supporting one another and being part of the team, even if it was a competitor from a different team. It was just about supporting each other and having fun, and not losing sight of the fact that we're all out there just trying to do our best, right? Those were some of the moments that just really stayed with me.
Usually I save this question for the end of the podcast or when we're wrapping up, but because of your timeline, I'll bring this up now. If you can recall your time with volleyball, basketball, track and field, or anything else, you can take this however you like. Throughout your athletic career, what would you say was the most exciting moment and the most embarrassing moment?
Oh, okay. I'll start with embarrassing. This is really, really easy. So my freshman year of high school, okay, so I should give a little bit of context. I went to a very small private Lutheran religious school from K through 8, and we did not have as many sports as were offered at the public school system. So I didn't have a track and field team prior to freshman year. So when I joined track and field in high school, I was incredibly new. I had no idea what I was doing. Like I said, I joined hurdles because I thought, well, I can leap. This sounds fun. I'll give it a whirl. And the very first track meet, freshman year, they put me out there with varsity. I think because nobody else ran the hurdles, not because I was good at it, but because nobody else ran that event. So they put me out in the hurdles, the 100-meter hurdles. And my goal, honestly, was to finish the race. I told myself, I just want to finish this race. That is all I want to do. Going through the race, I was doing okay. I think I was at probably the third to last hurdle, second to last hurdle. Just smacked into that thing. Trail leg looped around the hurdle, and I crashed into the track. Major track burn. I was all over the place. Oh my gosh, skid marks. It was terrible. And I got up and I said to myself, my goal is to finish the race. So I got up, I finished it. And then when they were announcing the places at the end, they announced that I was DQ'd because I finished in the wrong lane. So even though I finished, I didn't technically finish the race. And I just remember all my teammates were so wonderful and I dissolved into tears. And I'm like, I'm never running hurdles ever again. And they were so wonderful and supportive and kind to me, even as some of the older girls, And then that day, there I did. I ran the 300 hurdles. So I did run the hurdles again. And then I did run the hurdles in every race for the rest of my high school career. But it definitely got off to a bit of a rocky start. But yeah, that I will absolutely never forget that. But my most exciting memory, honestly, I think comes more from present day. I'm sure I have so many exciting memories from high school, but it's so hard to think back on that in this moment. But as I think in more recent history, when I finished the triathlon that I participated in a few years ago, that was really cool because I hadn't felt that athletic surge and that adrenaline in so long. And to finish a triathlon, I had never felt so strong as I did in that moment. So I think that was really cool. That was probably the most exciting for me.
You've competed in triathlons, 5Ks, so you've taken up, I wouldn't say recreationally because they are competitive events, but in many cases, you're not necessarily worried about finishing first. You just want to finish and
Yep.
not crash into anything, which I
Yeah.
presume you did. But competing in a triathlon, I have to imagine at least more than one person was going, "Are you crazy?" Because I've seen the Olympic triathlon. It is a grueling event. And even if you're not on the Olympic team, I don't think it's any less grueling. You have to take up three highly intensive events that test your physical endurance.
Mhm.
But you've done that. You've done 5Ks, 10Ks. What led you to embark on this journey of a triathlete?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I have to make sure people know I'm not out there doing Olympic triathlons. I am nowhere near in Ironman or Iron Woman. Those folks are amazing, and I admire them so much. What I do is I do sprint triathlon, which is a lot shorter distance. Still very difficult, but just want to make sure folks know that I don't want anybody to think I'm out there doing anything like that. Um, but honestly, for me, a big part of it was wanting to be involved in some type of competition again and feeling that drive. But another large component of it for me was the mental health aspect. Um, I really was going through a lot with my mental health, and I knew that I wanted to try to get on track mentally, physically, and I knew that part of mental health was physical health. Um, and so focusing my efforts and training for things like 5Ks and the triathlon really gave me a purpose, and it helped focus my energies and have a healthy outlet for myself. And just moving my body is so important to my mental health and helping me feel good. And so that's been a huge reason why I got into them and why I continue with them too, which is where, gosh, this quarantine period has been tough because you haven't had the opportunity for as much of that outlet, but still just trying to find the pockets of being able to participate in those types of things.
Maybe there's a virtual triathlon out there somewhere.
Yeah, well, during this time, I did have a group of people where we would do virtual 5Ks. So we would run 5Ks together, but really we were just all doing them in our own locations and then holding each other accountable. So that was a huge lifeline for me as we've been going through this pandemic.
What would you say, if you can recall, is your personal best either from a triathlon, the sprint triathlon, or your 5Ks?
Oh man, that I don't I don't know. And I knew you were going to ask this, and I'm like, shoot, I should have looked it up. With triathlon, it's tough because they're all different distances. So for a sprint triathlon, you start with the swim, and that could be anywhere from a quarter mile to a half mile for a sprint triathlon. And then for the bike, it could be anywhere from 10 to 20 miles. And then the run, 2 miles to a 5K. So it's hard to compare. It's not really apples to apples because all of the distances are so different. So really for me, it's just always trying to do better. And I'm trying to get back into them because obviously we didn't have anything this last year. And so I'm a little rusty. So it's going to take a little while for me to really get up to par with where I was before.
That's okay. I ask because I know that's something a lot of my friends who compete in those events, they're always striving for that personal
Yeah.
best, and they're not worried about making the Olympic team or Ironman or some of those major events. But I've got a lot of folks that take it up. I don't want to say recreationally because they are competitive official events where
Mm-hmm.
you can look up your times. So your records are out there, but kind of a fun way to stay involved, even though you're not competing on a team.
Yeah. And the challenge of having the three different types of activity, I think is what really drew me to the triathlon as well. I'm not a great runner, and so I do 5Ks, but I'm not very fast. But the idea of being able to mix in two different types of athletic activities and not just run, that was really attractive to me.
And you spoke of your triathlon participation as a way to address your mental health. That was a theme I touched on in my podcast last night. And that's something you and I had talked about. It's something that we're getting a lot more exposure of when it comes to sports
Yep.
and life in general. So, if you don't mind, where were you at before you decided you were going to take this up? And what have you made of the journey since you began competing in these athletic events as an adult?
Yeah, no, that's a great question and a really big question. How far back do you want me to go, Mike?
This is your platform. I mean, I'm hosting the podcast, but there's no limits as to where you want to talk about, where you want to go.
Yeah,
You can take this any direction you'd like. So you
absolutely.
could go way back to the start if you wanted to.
Yeah, no, so I think I'll just start by saying that I do think it's really cool and it's really necessary that a lot more folks are speaking out now about their journeys with mental health, and especially in the sports community, because for so long in athletics, this, you have this tough attitude, right? You fall down, you get back up, you power through it. And so that tended to carry over to mental health issues too, right? You just kind of brushed things off and worked through it. And now to see athletes stepping up and being really vulnerable is very powerful. Again, it's that representation piece with that as well. It's great for young folks to see that and know, okay, I'm not alone. It's okay to feel like this. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay to be vulnerable. And I think for me, I struggle with depression. And I think I undiagnosed for a very long time, which is not uncommon. I remember in high school, now looking back, it makes so much more sense. I was a 4.0 student, and I was all the way through high school. And so I think I hid my depression. While I don't think people always knew there was something wrong with me, or I shouldn't say wrong with me, but I don't think people knew that I was struggling, because I was performing very well academically. I was highly involved in athletics and clubs, but I was not okay. I would skip school a lot, but it would go under the radar because I'd always make up my schoolwork and I was always okay. But I would skip a lot because I didn't want to get out of bed. I didn't want to see people. I'm always someone who people look to as being very bubbly and outgoing. But I have pockets of time where I just don't want to see the world. I just can't. And so then, so I think I was struggling with depression throughout my childhood. And then, and I'll talk about this because if this is going to help people, I want people to find some comfort, and hopefully this can provide that for them if they have experienced this themselves. But the summer before I went off to college, I was sexually assaulted. And it was by somebody that I knew. And that was really hard. In that moment, I did give it a name. I knew I was raped. I went off to college. I knew I had been raped, but I didn't recognize that it had impacted me. I would openly tell people, oh yeah, I was raped, but it was very laissez-faire for me. I'm like, but I'm fine. I'm okay. And I think I might even remember that. I think we probably even talked about that in college at some point. I wrote, my freshman English creative writing class, I wrote a poem about it. And my teacher stopped me after class and said, are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm fine. He's like, I need to, I want to refer you to counseling. And I'm like, no, I'm totally fine. And he was like, okay, if you say you're totally fine. So I didn't recognize that I was not fine. This is the part in the story where the narrator comes in and goes, and she was not fine. I was not. So then throughout college, kind of pushing that down and not taking care of it. I didn't process it. I went through some really dark periods, and I self-medicated with alcohol. I hated that. I would get lost in that, and in those moments would feel okay because you would just lose consciousness, right? And so it was my escape. But the next day I would always hate what I had done, the decisions I had made, the things I had said to people. But it was this continuous loop of escape and then shame, and then escape and shame. And I kept going with that for so long past college. And it finally came to a head, gosh, probably, I don't know, 2012, 2013 is when it started getting really, really bad. And I started having suicidal ideations, and again, stretches of time where I would not get out of bed. I just wanted to die. I did. And the thing that kept bringing me back was thinking about my nephews. I have 11 little nuggets, nieces and nephews now, but at the time I had 3. And just kept thinking about, if anything ever happened to me, how would my sister have to tell them? And what would they think? And they would miss me. And it was enough to really snap me out of it and saying, okay, I need help. And also around that time, sexual assault was starting to be really heavily in the news. I don't know if you remember the Steubenville rape case with the high school football players and the young woman who was assaulted when she was intoxicated. And all of these things were really coming out really heavily in the news. And I would emotionally react so harshly to these things. I would engage in conversations on social media and just lash out. And it was very, very unhealthy. And finally I realized, like, oh my gosh, this is a trigger. This is triggering the experience that I had, that I thought I was okay with, that I'm very obviously not okay. There's a lot of unresolved issues here. So some of those highly publicized rape cases and my family ties and knowing that I had their support, I really kind of brought me to the place where I knew that I needed to get help. And so I started seeking out counseling and therapy, and those people are wonderful who do that work. And that really helped me. And it's been a journey. It's not completely a linear ascension, right? You're going to have some peaks and valleys in there, and some ups and some downs, but I've really learned how to manage my triggers and to be involved in some activities that help me find peace of mind. And I will say this, for a short time, I did go on some antidepressant medication. I did. I am a proponent of that. I know that some people are not, but for me, that really helped me. And I'm not here to judge anyone else's journey and the decisions they make. But for me, I did go on that for a short period of time until I was able to feel like I was able to manage my triggers in different ways. And so I'm at a place now where I know I still have depression. It's not something that's going to go away, but I know much better how to manage my depression and how to be self-aware about it, which is a huge piece of it as well.
One of my friends posted a comment on our live stream and he wanted to say, great sharing, Hannah, very strong showing. I don't know how often you have discussed this. I know we talked about it before we set up this podcast, and I do recall vaguely you mentioning it. And I was trying not to laugh, not at what happened to you, but when you told your English professor that you were fine.
Yeah.
But knowing that you really weren't.
Mm-hmm.
And masking is something that I've been looking into recently. And I think that's something a lot of folks have done, whether they're in athletics or not, or they try to brush it off. And in your case, you had your studies, you had your sports. You mentioned working for the football team for a time when you were a student at the U of M, and I don't remember that. I remember we shared classes because we both went to the J school, but did you work for the football team?
I did, freshman year.
Maybe that's why, because I think maybe we had 1 or 2 classes freshman year, and they didn't have a whole lot to do. Spanish was one. I think we had a J school class, and I just remember you looked a lot different back then.
But you'll have to find an old picture of me, Mike, to show the group.
I think, yeah, sometimes you bring them out of the archives yourself,
I
and I'm
do.
going, man, you really did look.
I
I know
do.
we.
I appreciate self-deprecating humor, and
Oh,
I
oh,
tend to do that. And that can, I do that too. And sometimes you talk about masking. Sometimes I use that self-deprecating humor as a mask as well with mental health issues, right? Because you don't want to make people uncomfortable. And so sometimes you kind of make light of it and crack jokes. And that's part of who I am. I like humor, but yeah, it doesn't take away from the seriousness of it.
not at all. And I remember reading a story a few years ago in the Players Tribune when Brianna Stewart mentioned her incident. I have known people in sports, past and present, who have dealt with that, who are
Yeah,
dealing with that. I don't think it's something that will ever go away, unfortunately, because we have seen over time there are people out there, and some we have seen on a national level, who don't view or see women with the respect that they should be given.
absolutely.
And for you, I don't know how much you read sports publications or follow the sports scene. And I say that because I'm not you and I'm not around, but I know
Mhm.
you are a big sports fan. But when you read stories like that, a lot of athletes, and I think even Terry Crews had discussed it. So this can
Yeah.
happen to men too.
Yes, absolutely. And that's a big part of the conversation that should not be forgotten.
So seeing all these stories, I don't know if it brings back memories of your own instance, but now that you're seeing more of this discussion become public, what do you make of it?
It's a necessary discussion. I think as I've seen some of these stories coming to light, some people will say, "Oh my gosh, I'm so surprised." And I will say, "I'm absolutely 0% surprised." I'm always sad and horrified, right, by some of the stories that come out, but I'm unfortunately never surprised. Um, the person who assaulted me was a college football player. And um, it's a really hard thing for me internally to balance because I'm a huge fan of athletics, but I'm also aware of this kind of dark underbelly um, environment that is present within the athletic community. And of course, it's not everyone at all, but you do tend to see some of these stories coming out um, within the athletic community. So it's really sad and it's really hard. But as you mentioned, it's not going away. We live in this society, but it's something we should always continually be working to combat. Um, and in order to combat it, you have to raise awareness. We can't fight something and we can't change something that we're not talking about. So I am incredibly grateful that people have been bringing forth their stories. The Me Too movement is huge. That was really emotional time for me. And the Me Too movement infiltrated all different areas, including athletics, right? Um, and it just felt like this. It felt so hard, but also you felt so much relief at the same time because people were finally starting to listen and believe the stories that were out there. That was the big change, the big turn, that people were starting to believe women and to believe the men who've also experienced assault, sexual assault and harassment. Um, so I'm just grateful that it's part of the national conversation. As much as it can trigger people who have experienced it, I am more so grateful that it is happening.
What are your coping mechanisms? You spoke of the triggers,
Mm-hmm.
whether it involves politics, because that's a common topic that gets discussed in the
Yeah.
news, or Brock Turner from a few years ago, the Stanford
Yep.
swimmer who was let off easy, which led to the judge presiding in that case to get voted out. But these stories that continue to surface, it's always heartbreaking when you hear about it, but when you read about these things, when you discover it, notice it in social media, traditional news, we have a lot of ways of accessing this information. When you see it take place, no matter where it happens, sports, politics, entertainment, how do you manage those emotions knowing that it can cause a relapse to your own experience with assault?
Yep, absolutely. Um, you're so right. It's so saturated sometimes, and it does feel overwhelming. But what I've had to learn to do is be be self-aware of my snap reactions. Of course, we're going to feel emotional. Of course, I'm going to emotionally react. But if I don't engage on social media, if I try to restrain myself from continuing to engage on the topic, well, I shouldn't say let me start that over, Mike. I think it's really important to talk about it because we have to talk about it in order to make a difference, right? In order to see change. But what I refrain from is engaging with argumentative folks about it, with folks who don't feel like what happens is real, where they feel like women are asking for it, where you're seeing all that negative narrative. I used to fight those people in a really reactive way. And I cannot do that because then I just get into a really dark hole that's really hard to climb out of. So, what I've had to teach myself is to take a breath and take a moment and to take a step back. And if I really feel like typing something out to somebody in a moment of reaction, write it. Write it out somewhere else, come back to it, and then see if I still want to post it. And so, with that, too, is just if I'm going to post something, I know that I just have to post it and try to plant a seed and try to change some hearts and minds. And then I have to leave it. I can't continually engage if people are going to get really argumentative about it. So that's one piece of it, is just kind of limiting my social media engagement with people who just don't want to listen, who don't want to try to understand, who don't want to believe that sexual assault is a problem. But also it's the physical movement piece. I really got heavily into yoga. That's when I really started getting more into 5Ks. It's taking that step back, and it's going and doing a quick yoga class. It's going on a quick run. It's just bringing myself back and centering myself to those things. So it's a balance for sure.
And earlier you spoke of your first triathlon as another healing mechanism in this process. So what do you remember running that? I should say competing, because you're not just running in those triathlons. I got to
Yeah.
remind myself, Mike, it's 3 sports in one. But when you completed that first triathlon, how symbolic was that for you? Not just knowing that you were able to do it, but you were able to complete this event and know that it was another step
Yeah.
forward in your healing process.
Mm-hmm. Honestly, I was a little emotional. Like I said before, had never felt so strong and so powerful. And it wasn't just strong and powerful physically, but it was strong and powerful mentally. When you're out on the run, I didn't have music that I was listening to, because in the transition area, I just wanted to be as fast as I could. And so I was just on the run with my thoughts, so when you get to the run is the third and final piece of the triathlon. And so I was just there with my thoughts, and I was reflecting on a lot of the things I had gone through in my journey. And when I finished that, I felt like I had taken back a piece of me that I felt like I had lost through the assault and through the healing journey. I felt like I had reclaimed some of my power in a way. It was really, really powerful.
And I don't get to see you that often. What, of course, none of us have with the pandemic, but ever since you came to terms with what happened and reached that point where you understood that what happened wasn't normal. I mean, I still can't wrap my head around the fact that you said, "Oh, I'm fine," but I can understand why you might say something like that, and why so many others would, with the culture surrounding accusations of abuse, assault, etc. But what have you done in terms of advocacy
Yeah.
since you came to terms with yourself and your mental health, spiritual health, all of that? What are some things you've done to promote awareness
Hmm.
about this experience?
Yeah, no, great question. One of the biggest things I did, and the thing I'm probably most proud of, is I brought the It's On Us campaign to St. Cloud State University. While I was in my master's program, I was working full time, but I was also a full time student in the Master's of Higher Education Administration program. Great program if anybody's interested. It's all online. But as part of that, I had to do an internship, and I did my internship with the Women's Center at St. Cloud State. And at the time, President Potter had received an email about the It's On Us campaign, came to the Women's Center and asked who would like to take this on. And my supervisor asked if I wanted it. And I said, hell yes, I do. So the It's On Us campaign is about raising awareness and combating sexual assault and sexual harassment on college campuses across the United States. And so with that campaign, I created promo videos. I had events. I had a launch event where we had speakers. That was early on in my journey too. And so that was really therapeutic for me, because it was so much beyond myself. I wasn't just doing this for me. I was doing this for everyone out there who had experienced this. And for young women and young men too, who were looking to this and needing some healing and looking to understand and wanting to be part of the solution, right? And so yeah, that It's On Us campaign is something I look back on, and I'm really grateful that the timing of it came to me and I was able to take advantage of that. So really, really grateful and really thankful for that opportunity.
At the start of the podcast, we noted that you're the director of undergraduate recruitment now at St. Cloud State. So I don't know what your involvement is on the campus as far as interacting with students, student athletes, but I'm guessing based on your title, one of your responsibilities is trying to find people
Yes.
who would want to attend St. Cloud State and who would benefit from it. But what have you gathered and observed? And you can include the It's On Us campaign that you brought to St. Cloud State. But when it comes to mental health with athletes or people who endured what you went through,
Yeah.
I don't know how often you hear stories from the student body, but what vibe do you get from the work that you're doing?
Yeah, so with my role, the Director of Undergraduate Admissions, I really work with students prior to them becoming a student at St. Cloud State, right? So I'm working with them while they're in high school or when they're transferring from a different institution, or in some cases, adult learners who are looking to come back to school after a period of time. Um, but I do get to meet with a lot of the athletic recruits when they're on their recruiting visits, which is really fun for me because I love to get to know them and then get to see them compete and grow and evolve during their time at St. Cloud State. But mental health I have seen that to be more prevalent now than it ever used to be. And whether there's more cases of mental health or if we're just more aware of it, who knows, right? I think there's a lot of discussion about that. But I have seen the need for mental health services grow. We do have CAPS, counseling and psychological services on our campus, and campuses across the nation have that as well. But I've definitely, not in my official capacity. In my role, I don't work with current students. I don't work on the retention side of the house, as I mentioned, but I do have a lot of current students that remember me and know me from their time going through the admission process. And so they'll come to me just as someone, a trusted adult that they can speak to. And so I do have those conversations with students, and I do share my experiences, and I do make those referrals to the counseling and psychological services. I always think about that quote, be who you needed when you were younger. And I really try to live by that. And of course, you can't force anybody to realize something or be ready to confront something that they're not ready to, but I really try to be someone who can help someone get to that point, right? And just be a supportive presence in their life and be that shoulder to lean on and an ear right? A lot of times it's not me talking, it's just me listening, being there to hear them and giving them that safe space to express themselves.
I like what you said earlier when you spoke of your role in athletics and being an athlete, competing in 3 sports and all the other activities, how it can give you strength, but it can sometimes give you that false sense of strength. So when you're in a crisis, as you noted, you tend to shrug it off because athletes, they just get back
Push
up.
on,
They
push
get back
forward.
up and push forward. That's what we're accustomed to seeing. And
Mhm.
that's certainly not to dispute the grit that we do see athletes
Yes.
exhibit when they battle through injuries. Sometimes I think they're crazy for doing it, but the sport is what they love doing. That is their identity, and you take that away, and it can
Mhm.
be a harrowing experience. But it can also manifest in unexpected ways. And I don't know what kind of resources were around when we were in college, but with what you said a while ago and what you're saying now, be the person you wanted to be when you were younger, it sounds like we are making that step towards refitting that mindset where you can be strong, but that doesn't necessarily mean you have to shrug everything off that comes your way. I mean, we all like to think we're durable and we can handle anything. And maybe we give ourselves more credit than we deserve. And that is not a knock on anybody. It's just we're so used to solving our own problems and individualism. That culture can be great, but
Yeah.
it can also have its drawbacks,
Yeah.
and that affected you in a really serious way.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, since you spoke of how the athlete in you wanted to fend off anything that could
Mhm.
come your way, but
Mhm.
now your role and your lived experience as a triathlete and a runner and using that as a tool to assist you when you sense a depression or anxiety episode coming.
Mhm.
If you could go back and meet the younger version of yourself, what would you say?
Oh, man. Oh, that's a great question, Mike. What would I tell the younger version of myself? Oh, well, I think for sure that, well, vulnerability is strength is a big one. But also to know that I was enough, um, that I was worth, that I had self-worth, and that I had to remember that, um, that my self-worth wasn't based in other people, that my self-worth was really found within myself, and that there was so much good, um, to be found that I just didn't believe in at that time. And that really strength came from within, but strength also came from being vulnerable too.
And as you were exploring your answer, I actually go back to some conversations we had in college where now it all makes sense, where you gave off that vibe, that nonchalant attitude
Yeah.
toward things. I think I remember that one Spanish class where you were just kind of sarcastically mentioning, I think it was over catcalling or something, and you're like, "I'm a woman, I have boobs," something like that. It was like you were acknowledging the situation, but in a very casual way that I don't think you would do now. Like it sounds crazy, and that is a
Yeah.
really weird tangent for me to remember. So my apologies if I made things
No,
awkward.
no, 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 no. That's so true though, Mike. I think I had experienced, oh shoot, I had experienced, as does any woman and young girl and female, um, I had experienced a lot of sexual harassment. And again, I had been sexually assaulted. And so it becomes so normal and so commonplace that you just internalize it and you learn to brush it off. You knew it felt really uncomfortable, and you experienced it before you knew what it was. So you just knew that it was really uncomfortable. You knew you didn't like it. You knew it didn't feel right, but you didn't exactly have a name for it. Well, now I look back and I understand I was being sexualized, and objectified, and it was harassment and assault. But back then, you don't understand the damage it was doing to you internally and how it was impacting you. You just knew that it was wrong. And now looking back, I'm like, oh my goodness. Oh, and I want to help young women work through those types of things, right? It's just, yeah, it's a lot to take on when you're growing up. And I think that happens with female athletes too, is unfortunately, they're often objectified instead of looked up to for their talents. Get looked up, not looked up to, I shouldn't say that. They in the news media, and you see so many people who just completely objectify and sexualize them instead of concentrating on what's important, and that's who they are and the accomplishments that they are doing. So that's, yeah, all complicated, tied together in that way.
Well, I know exactly what you're saying, because I follow the Awful Announcing websites. They do a lot of coverage in sports media, and over the years, it doesn't happen frequently, but you still come across those hot mic moments or those quips that are truly inappropriate,
Yeah.
especially with female athletes or women in sports. And I don't think you even want to get into some of the mentions that Sarah Fuller got when she
Oh,
took the
it's
field for
terrible.
Vanderbilt. And it's coming. I mean, it's unfortunate, but it's coming, because people are the people who are typing it up on their keyboards or their phones wouldn't have the guts to tell her in their face, but because they can
Yeah.
hide behind that avatar, that faceless avatar, you know how that goes. And
Yeah.
I got some of that too when I offered commentary on Candace Wiggins, different subject, but when she went on her expose on feeling bullied because it came off as anti-gay. And
Mm.
I remember saying something about it, and of course I got skewered. I knew it was coming, so it's like, well, these folks would never have the guts to say it to my face, so I don't worry about it. If you know it's coming, you can kind of shield yourself from it, but it still happens,
Yeah.
and there will be a lot of accomplishments. I know we're only going to see more. How many women hold coaching positions in the NFL now, for
Yeah.
example? Becky Hammon figures to get a coaching job somewhere in the NBA, doing a lot of
Mhm.
work with the Spurs. We are knocking down doors. And then
Yeah.
Beth Mowins, I think, first woman to call an NFL game. And then you have Hannah Storm,
Yeah.
and I forget the other one, doing the Amazon streams.
Mhm.
So we've seen female trailblazers,
Yep.
all female crews.
Breaking the
And
glass ceiling.
right.
At St. Cloud State, we have a really great broadcast journalism program there, and they're very heavily in the athletic production, Husky Productions. They last year had their first all-female crew broadcasting some of the games, and it was really a neat moment, I think. And I just have to share right now, I'm wearing this necklace. It's a little broken glass, so it's breaking the glass ceiling. So as you're talking about all these accomplishments, this was a gift that was given to me by a young woman. She's was an athlete at St. Cloud State, a really accomplished athlete at St. Cloud State. And this was a gift she had given to me. And as much as I think she gave this to me because she said I helped her, she helped me immensely. And so this is something that's really special. And it reminds me of all of those things that those women you've mentioned have done. And it really inspires me, to continue to be an advocate too.
And this may seem like a silly question, but going back to what I was talking about, we see all these accomplishments, and there will be more. I said, it's not a matter of if, but when, but which NBA team is going to be the first. So I'm thinking it might be the Spurs who hire Becky Hammon, because she's been interviewed, but I'm going, who is going to make that jump? And I give a lot of credit to Greg Popovich and his disciples for encouraging these types of conversations too. Him and Steve Kerr, not afraid to talk about current events and
Oh,
the people
Steve
on their
Kerr.
staff.
Yeah.
They become two of my favorite coaches, even though they have no involvement with any of my local teams. And Cheryl Reeve, local example,
Yeah.
decided to put together an all-female coaching squad last year after she thought about it. And several of her assistants got head coaching jobs, and deservedly
Mhm.
so. When you look at their track record, James Wade, especially with the Chicago Sky. But I remember her saying something that she's all about promoting change
Yeah.
and equality. She doesn't shy away from it, but she said, for me to take that next step and to feel authentic, this is what I have to do.
Yep.
Notre Dame, Muffet McGraw did the same thing.
Uh,
And
Powerful.
what, however you feel about that, my view is this: when you're in charge of those programs, Cheryl Reeve, the GM, Muffet McGraw, the head coach, you are free to put together the staff that you see fit. It
Yep.
doesn't matter what I think. But what do you think can be done? How can others who might be watching this podcast and hearing about your experiences for the first time, what are some things they can do to promote awareness, not just with breaking glass ceilings, but also to be comfortable with themselves mentally and physically?
Mm, gosh, what can they do? What are some of the steps? Honestly, I think therapy is good for everyone. Even if you think you're totally fine, yeah, that's great. We're all a level of fine and we're all a level of not fine at times, right? But we're all human and we've all had experiences and we've all gone through traumatic events and we've all had a childhood where we've had perspectives that or we've had experiences that have lent to certain perspectives, right? So I think no matter what, going to a therapist and just having that safe space to talk through things, you're going to uncover things that you didn't even recognize were inside of you, and that were impacting you. So I think that's an easy first step. Of course, it's not always that easy, right? Because it costs money and it takes time. So as much as people are able to, fortunately, there's a lot more programs out there that are offering therapy at low cost, especially now with the pandemic coming out and people really seeking that out. But I think that's a great thing that people should do is I think everyone should talk to somebody. And if it's not a therapist or a psychologist, a trusted friend, just speaking to someone, that safe space where you can really explore some things that you may not have even recognized were impacting you.
Getting a chance to play college sports is a life-changing experience, and your friend Natalie can attest to that. As I was saying, navigating the environment you and I once did, and now you get to play the part of a mentor, fan, friend, all of that. So I think it's cool you got to take part in one of St. Cloud State's, or I should say, a student for St. Cloud State, one of her biggest moments in her life, and you got to witness it.
Yeah, it was really special. It was really special. And like you said, there's not many folks who make it on to play college sports. Do you know the exact percentage? It's a very small percentage. I think that's part of the meme.
It's a small percentage that make it to the college level, and an even smaller one who go pro.
Right. So to be in the top handful of folks who make it to a national level competition in college, that's insanely cool. And I look up to that. I admire that. We always say I'm a wannabe college athlete. But yeah, no, really, really neat.
Well, you did compete in intramural events. I'm trying to remember what sports did you.
Volleyball.
It was volleyball. Was that your favorite sport?
Yeah, volleyball was my favorite sport to play in high school, but I loved running the hurdles as well. Um, I did, like I mentioned at the beginning, I took a track class in college, and then we had a little mini track meet at the end. So I did run the hurdles, and there was one other young woman who did the hurdles, and my goal was to win, and I did. So I felt pretty good about that. But what was funny about that class is we had actual track athletes in that class, so they made the rest of us feel pretty underaccomplished. And I shouldn't say they made us feel. We just felt that way. They didn't make us feel anyway.
It's like that Wayne's World line, "We're not worthy."
Yeah. But having them in the class was really cool because it was just fun to see um, what they were capable of. Their athleticism was just really neat to see up close.
And to add to what you said, I met friends who won Miss Basketball, for example.
Mhm.
as seniors, and then they go to college and they do all right, but it doesn't pan out the way they thought it would. You
Yeah.
just don't know. And we make such a big deal about all of the college commitments, and you probably are aware of this to some extent. All of the athletes who commit to playing college basketball. I mean, a few have gone to St. Cloud State,
Mhm.
and an old friend of mine played Division II there, and now she's playing professionally. So
Yeah.
it goes back to what we were saying before. D2 doesn't have the most prestige, the most hype. You're not going to hear about it too much outside of maybe the local papers in St. Cloud, but it's still a scholarship. It's still a
Mhm.
sport.
And you never know how the development is gonna go, right? When you hit college, development is so different for every person, and honestly, so much of it too is the fit with the program, with the coach, and how that impacts you as a player and as an athlete.
Thanks again, Hannah. Thanks for sharing everything about yourself. I know at least one viewer was impressed with your boldness and your willingness to share this. And I don't know how often you've told your story, but maybe this is the start. Maybe this leads to more speaking opportunities or interviews. And I'm grateful that you are this open about yourself, because I can only imagine how difficult it was when you were bottling it all in. And that is not a fault of yours. You just were trying to make sense of everything,
Yep.
trying to, not ignore it, but you were trying to
Just trying to move
navigate.
forward.
Yeah,
Just trying to forward, move on.
you were trying to move on,
Yep.
and feel like this wasn't bothering you,
Yep.
but it was. And to hold that in for so long, I can understand how it led you to points in your life where you didn't want to talk to anybody, or you were ready to put an end to everything. So
Mhm.
the fact that you're frank about this now, it's not easy. I don't think it ever will be for someone in your position, but I'm glad you were willing to come on and do this. And if this leads to something down the road, I will be the first one there for that speaking engagement. uh, Besides, I've been meaning to get back to St. Cloud. Went up there a couple of years ago, and I enjoyed some of the restaurants in that area.
Yeah.
I've made a few visits up there, but
When things open back up and it's safe to do so, please come visit. And I just want to thank you for giving me the platform and providing the space um, to be able to speak to these things. You know, we obviously find them very important. I know you do too. And I think it can help folks. It really can. I like to think, you know, if I don't know how it would have been different if I would have heard someone open up when I was going through this, if it would have helped me accelerate my healing, I'm not sure. But if there is the chance that it could help somebody, then it's worth it. It's completely worth it. So thank you. Thank you, Mike.
thank you, Hannah. I needed a moment to catch myself. But I am grateful for our friendship, that it still holds strong after all these years, and that you and I will probably talk with each other after this is done. And I can't wait for that next meeting.
Yep, absolutely. Well, you're a special person, Mike. Keep it up. I love what you do.
And the feeling is mutual, Hannah.
Thank you, Mike. It's been fun.
Once again, Hannah Mikels, who you will see hopefully at another triathlon or 5K in the future. And as we noted, the Director of Undergraduate Admissions at St. Cloud State. So if you have a student who is considering enrollment there, don't be afraid to hit her up, and she will give you the lowdown about the St. Cloud State campus and all it has to offer. And if you want to be a guest on a future episode of this podcast, just contact us on social media at the Mike Peden on Twitter or Instagram. All you need is a story, and we'd be glad to share it. So until next time, thanks for watching.